So you want to get into Warhammer 40k novels? Well, buckle up, Chucklenut, for I am the Emperor's will made manifest, and I'm going to provide you a brief overview in order to get on your way. I am going to be providing examples of books, but I'll warn you in advance that some may be impossible to find. I'll also say that I'm several years behind. I read 40k books as my filler novels while I waited for my other authors to release books, but unfortunately the Black Library, who published the 40k books, released way too many, and I couldn't keep up and have a giant backlog, so I stopped following what they've put out in recent years. The current system seems to be giving an author a trilogy of books, and they'll come out in hardcover, then softcover, and finally be sold as an omnibus with all 3 books and 1 to 3 short stories all bound together. After that, the book disappears. There are rarely second print runs, unless they're from a super popular series. So let's jump right in. First, do you have a favorite faction? If yes, great! Perfect place to start. Unfortunately, there's a lot less books from the point of view of the alien races than of humans, Space Marines, or Chaos Space Marines. There is a series of Eldar books that got released called Path of the Eldar by Gav Thorpe. I really enjoyed the first book, but I haven't read the other 2 yet. There's also been a Tau book as well. I believe it's called Pathfinder, Path of Fire, but I've never gotten my hands on a copy, so I don't know if it's good or anything. If you don't know where to start and are scared to jump into such a lore-rich universe, then I heartily recommend the Hammer and Bolter Volume 1 or 2 Omnibus. Hammer and Bolter is a monthly fiction magazine put out, and these 2 volumes are collections of short stories that span both the 40k and also the fantasy universe. These are a great place to start since you'll be able to experience all the different factions and authors and get a good inkling of what types of stories tickle your fancy. I haven't read any fantasy novels outside of the Hammer and Bolter volumes, so I can't help you on that front. So let's get into Space Marines and Chaos Space Marines. Again, if you have a favorite faction, check for their novels. They're all pretty great. I will say I'm rather tepid on the Space Marines though. I started with the Salamander novels, and I think they're quite good, though I do recognize some people were upset because their lore got changed from how they were originally presented. The Ultramarines are fine, though they're called the Vanilla Marines for a reason, and I've never been a big fan of them, and I urge you not to buy their novels yet unless you really want to. They've already been released solo, then in omnibus form, which is how I bought them all, but now the Black Library has re-released them all in single book format as a cash grab. Screw that. Look for the omnibus version, since again those come with 3 books and some short stories, and all for the cost of about 1.5 of the new single books. James Swallow wrote the Blood Angels as well as the Sisters of Battle books. I will say the Sisters of Battle finally got an omnibus release, so if you like them, go wild. As for his writing, I find it bland and boring, so his Blood Angel and Sisters of Battle books are pretty forgetful, though I will note that the Sisters of Battle was at least unique. The big problem with Space Marine novels is that it's hard to do them well. A lot of authors have trouble characterizing them since they're all indoctrinated to be the best and fight for the Emperor. What this means is that they either have a huge flaw, Blood Angels and their bloodlust, are just perfect boring zealots who fight well, Vanilla Marines, or the forces of chaos are corrupting them from within somehow. It's not bad, but it gets predictable pretty quickly. And that's why I recommend the Space Marines Battles series. Though I did go to chapters and had a cursory glance around, and I think it's been renamed to Space Marine Conquest, but don't quote me on that. These are one-off books that can be any Space Marine chapter, and it's just the story of a single battle. That way the author can focus on providing a war story without needing to try and shoehorn in actual personalities with flaws that run counter to their original purpose. Pick one up to see if the Space Marines are for you. I'd also recommend the books involving the Death Watch, essentially hunter-killer teams sent on dangerous missions by the Inquisition and involving groups from all Space Marine chapters, as well as Chris Robertson's Sons of Dorn. I really wish he'd write a continuation, but that's one of my own personal quirks. I love reading about the creation and recruitment of units. But let's move on to Chaos Space Marines. Chaos Space Marine novels are a lot like Space Marines, though because their gimmick is more influential, it has more impact and provides more flavorful story. The Wordbearers Omnibus is a great place to go for pure grade A Chaos Space Marine goodness. Now, if you were to ask me my favorite Chaos Space Marines book series, I would have to point you in the direction of Aaron Dembski Bowden's Night Lords series. He's one of my favorite Warhammer 40k authors, and the Night Lords are a real treat. I will give fair warning, though, that they aren't stereotypical chaos. They worship chaos undivided, so they don't worship one of the specific gods, though individuals can worship one or the other. But the characters in the story are unique, the story is incredibly well done, and it's just great. There's literally a scene where a helmetless Night Lord is fighting a Space Marine, gets pissed, and proceeds to headbutt him until the Space Marine's helmet breaks, then continues headbutting him until his head is turned to mush. Finally, we're going to talk about the strongest books in the series, and that's the Imperial Guard. I would say the strength of these books results in the fact that they're plain old humans, and it's easier for authors to give them personalities and flaws while being able to simultaneously put them in dreadful situations where anyone can die. There are some novels where everyone dies. The end. Dead Men Walking by Steve Lyons is a great book to read if you want to experience absolute despair and the true grimness of the 40k universe. There are a lot of standalone books involving the Imperial Guard, and I overall rate them highly. There are a couple omnibus editions to combine these books, though I will warn you, if you manage to get your hands on Hammer of the Emperor, it contains the book Desert Raiders by Lucien Saulban, and I consider that to be one of the worst books in the entire 40k universe. It's straight trash. The only thing worse is Ian Watson's The Inquisition War. Humans have a lot going for them. There's an omnibus by Matthew Farrer that focuses on the Adeptus Arbites, Arbites, one of those, essentially the police force. There's Ravener as well as Eisenhorn, which are based on the Inquisition, and while I haven't read Ravener, I have read Eisenhorn and enjoyed it well enough. But the two greatest series, and also the series with the greatest amount of novels, would have to be the Gaunt's Ghost series by Dan Abnett and the Caiaphas Cain series by Sandy Mitchell. Gaunt's Ghosts is grade A amazing writing. You will get to know the members of his regiment, and they will be stuck into horrible war zones, and some of them will die. It may even be your favorite trooper. This is dark, gritty, and has an extremely tense atmosphere. If anything is going to get you into the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, it will be this series. And now I'll take a sharp right turn into Sandy Mitchell's Caiaphas Cain series. I came to it late in my journey of absorbing all the 40k novels I could get my hands on, and I'm sad to say it took so long to reach. This is my favorite series of all of 40k. Unfortunately, I've only read the first 6 books, and there are now 16, I believe, and while the third omnibus is said to have released on September 18th, 2018, I just now managed to get my hands on it at the end of October. But this series is exactly what I needed and helped me not burn out on 40k on the whole. After a while, the grim seriousness gets to you. And yes, the grimness is the selling point, but eventually you get tired of the bravado and zealotry of the Space Marines or the pure evil of the forces of chaos and want something lighter. And here's where Cain comes in. A brief overview is that you're reading his memoirs that he wrote after retiring, and an inquisitor is collating and editing the book after the fact, so expect a lot of footnotes at the bottom of the page. But more importantly, it's the story of a selfish, cowardly man who only wants to save his own hide, and in the process consistently saves the day by doing so. It has humor. And humor is sorely needed in these novels. Not outright comedy, mind you, but ridiculous and unlucky situations where the protagonist is self-aware enough to notice them and lament what he's got himself into, rather than falling back into the "I'm a soldier, clam up and fight, rah rah rah" motif. If you read nothing else, please at least read a Caiaphas Cain novel. The last big section of books is called the Horus Heresy. This is essentially a history of how they all ended up in the 41st millennium. It also has like 50 books in the series at this point, and I only managed to get to number 9. The first 4 or so books are the important ones, detailing Horus's descent to chaos, but after that I believe that Games Workshop realized they had a huge cash cow, and had all their authors start contributing novels for the series. The series goes from a straight arrow to a swirling path of tangents very quickly. You jump around to random important events in the war, to the Mechanicum, and everywhere under the sun. Approach this series at your own risk, because I don't think it will ever end. I hope this gave you some idea of where to start your descent into the world of 40k, and want to finish off by just mentioning some books I loved, and a brief overview of what they're about. I'm going to start with The Last Chancers. This omnibus is a series of 3 stories about a penal legion who get put in dangerous war zones designed to kill them all. It's essentially Hunger Games in the 40k universe, and the first 2 books are great, while the third leaves something to be desired. If you can ever get your hands on the omnibus, you really should. I've mentioned Gaunt's Ghost and the Caiaphas Cain series, so add them to this list. And finally, I'll add Imperial Guard Volume 1. They're all great. Finally, as I was going through chapters picking up the third omnibus of the Caiaphas Cain series, I did notice that there seems to be a lot more Eldar and maybe some Dark Eldar books by Gav Thorpe as well, and there even appears to be an Orcs omnibus. So get out there and explore. And remember, there is no such thing as innocence, only degrees of guilt. Also, feel free to let me know of any of your favorite novels so I can check them out and maybe add them to my giant backlog that I'll never get through.